And now for part 2 of the story of Guleesh. How Guleesh won the heart of his princess. He, Guleesh, turned to the young woman and said to her, "Thanks be to God they're gone. Would you not sooner stay with me than with them?" She gave him no answer. "There's trouble and grief on her yet," said Guleesh in his own mind, and he spoke to her again. "I am afraid that you must spend this night in my father's house, lady, and if there is anything that I can do for you, tell me, and I'll be your servant." The beautiful girl remained silent, but there were tears in her eyes, and her face was white and red after each other. "Lady," said Guleesh, "tell me what you would like me to do now. I never belonged at all to that lot of she-hoes who carried you away with them. I am the son of an honest farmer, and I went with them without knowing it. If I'll be able to send you back to your father, I'll do it, and I pray you, make any use of me now that you may wish." He looked into her face, and he saw the mouth moving, as if she was going to speak, but there came no word from it. "It cannot be," said Guleesh, "that you are dumb. Did I not hear you speaking to the king's son in the palace tonight? Or has that devil made you really dumb when he struck his nasty hand on your jaw?" The girl raised her white smooth hand and laid her finger on her tongue to show him that she had lost her voice and power of speech, and that tears ran out of her 2 eyes like streams. And Guleesh's own eyes were not dry, for as rough as he was on the outside, he had a soft heart, and could not stand the sight of the young girl, and she in that unhappy plight. He began thinking to himself what he ought to do, and he did not like to bring her home with himself to his father's house, for he knew well that they would not believe him, that he had been in France, and brought back with him the King of France's daughter, and he was afraid they might make a mock of the young lady or insult her. As he was doubting what he ought to do and hesitating, he chanced to remember the priest. "Glory be to God," said he, "I know now what I'll do. I'll bring her to that priest's house, and he won't refuse me to keep the lady and care for her." He turned to the lady again and told her that he was loath to take her to his father's house, but that there was an excellent priest, very friendly to himself, who would take good care of her if she wished to remain in his house, but that if there was any other place she would rather go, he said he would bring her to it. She bent her head to show him she was obliged, and gave him to understand that she was ready to follow him any place he was going. "We will go to the priest's house, then," said he. "He is under an obligation to me, and will do anything I ask him." They went together accordingly to the priest's house, and the sun was just rising when they came to the door. Guleesh beat it hard, and as early as it was, the priest was up and opened the door himself. He wondered when he saw Guleesh and the girl, for he was certain that it was coming wanting to be married they were. "Guleesh, Guleesh, isn't it a nice boy you are that you can't wait till 10 o'clock or till 12, but that you must be coming to me at this hour looking for marriage, you and your sweetheart? You ought to know that I can't marry you at such a time, or at all events can't marry you lawfully." "But, oh, boo, boo," said he suddenly, as he looked again at the young girl. "In the name of God, who have you here? Who is she? Or how did you get her?" "Father," said Guleesh, "you can marry me or anybody else if you wish, but it's not looking for marriage I came to you now, but to ask you, if you please, to give a lodging in your house to this young lady." The priest looked at him as though he had 10 heads on him, but without putting any other question to him, he desired him to come in himself and the maiden, and when they came in, he shut the door, brought them into the parlour, and put them sitting. "Now, Guleesh," said he, "tell me truly, who is this young lady, and whether you're out of your senses really, or are only making a joke of me?" "I'm not telling a word of lying or making a joke of you," said Guleesh. But it was from the palace of the King of France I carried off this lady, and she is the daughter of the King of France." He began his story then and told the whole to the priest, and the priest was so much surprised that he could not help calling out at times or clapping his hands together. When Guleesh said, from what he saw, he thought the girl was not satisfied with the marriage that was going to take place in the palace before he and the Sheehogues broke it up, there came a red blush into the girl's cheek, and he was more certain than ever that she had sooner be as she was, badly as she was, than be the married wife of the man she hated. When Guleesh said that he would be very thankful to the priest if he would keep her in his own house, the kind man said he would do that as long as Guleesh pleased, but that he did not know what they ought to do with her, because they had no means of sending her back to her father again. Guleesh answered that he was uneasy about the same thing, and that he saw nothing to do but to keep quiet until they should find some opportunity of doing something better. They made it up then between themselves that the priest should let on that it was his brother's daughter he had, who was come on a visit to him from another county, and that he should tell everybody that she was dumb and do his best to keep everyone away from her. They told the young girl what it was they intended to do, and she showed by her eyes that she was obliged to them. Guleesh went home then, and when his people asked him where he had been, he said that he had been asleep at the foot of the ditch and had passed the night there. There was great wonderment on the priest's neighbours at the girl who came so suddenly to his house, without anyone knowing where she was from or what business she had there. Some of the people said that everything was not as it ought to be, and others that Guleesh was not like the same man that was in it before, and that it was a great story how he was drawn every day to the priest's house, and that the priest had a wish and a respect for him, a thing they could not clear up at all. That was true for them indeed, for it was seldom the day went by but Guleesh would go to the priest's house and have a talk with him, and as often as he would come, he used to hope to find the young lady well again, and with leave to speak. But alas, she remained dumb and silent without relief or cure. Since she had no other means of talking, she carried on a sort of conversation between herself and himself by moving her hand and fingers, winking her eyes, opening and shutting her mouth, laughing or smiling, and 1,000 other signs, so that it was not long until they understood each other very well. Guleesh was always thinking how he should send her back to her father, but there was no one to go with her, and he himself did not know what road to go, for he had never been out of his own country before the night he brought her away with him. Nor had the priest any better knowledge than he. But when Guleesh asked him, he wrote 3 or 4 letters to the King of France and gave them to buyers and sellers of wares who used to be going from place to place across the sea, but they all went astray, and never a one came to the king's hand. This was the way they were for many months, and Guleesh was falling deeper and deeper in love with her every day, and it was plain to himself and the priest that she liked him. The boy feared greatly at last lest the king should really hear where his daughter was and take her back from himself, and he besought the priest to write no more, but to leave the matter to God. So they passed the time for a year, until there came a day when Guleesh was lying by himself on the grass on the last day of the last month in autumn, and he was thinking over again in his own mind of everything that happened to him from the day that he went with the Sheehogues across the sea. He remembered then suddenly that it was one November night that he was standing at the gable of the house when the whirlwind came and the Sheehogues in it, and he said to himself, "We have November night again today, and I'll stand in the same place I was last year until I see if the good people come again. Perhaps I might see or hear something that would be useful to me, and might bring back her talk again to Mary." That was the name himself and the priest called the king's daughter, for neither of them knew her right name. He told his intention to the priest, and the priest gave him his blessing. Guleesh accordingly went to the old rath when the night was darkening, and he stood with his bent elbow leaning on a grey old flag, waiting till the middle of the night should come. The moon rose slowly, and it was like a knob of fire behind him. And there was a white fog which was raised up over the fields of grass and all damp places through the coolness of the night after a great heat in the day. The night was calm, as is a lake when there is not a breath of wind to move a wave on it, and there was no sound to be heard but the crawling on of the insects that would go by from time to time, or the harsh sudden scream of the wild geese as they passed from lake to lake, half a mile up in the air over his head, or the sharp whistle of the golden and green plover, rising and lying and rising as they do on a calm night. There were 1,000 bright stars shining over his head, and there was a little frost out, which left the grass under his foot white and crisp. He stood there for an hour, for 2 hours, for 3 hours, and the frost increased greatly, so that he heard the breaking of the tranines under his foot as often as he moved. He was thinking in his own mind at last that the she-hos would not come that night, and that it was as good for him to return back again, when he heard a sound far away from him coming towards him, and he recognized what it was at the first moment. The sound increased, and at first it was like the beating of waves on a stony shore, and then it was like the falling of a great waterfall, and at last it was like a loud storm in the tops of the trees, and then the whirlwind burst into the wrath of one rout, and the she-hos were in it. It all went by him so suddenly that he lost his breath with it, but he came to himself on the spot and put an ear on himself, listening to what they would say. Scarcely had they gathered into the rath till they all began shouting and screaming and talking amongst themselves, and then each one of them cried out, "My horse and bridle and saddle! My horse and bridle and saddle!" And Guleesh took courage and called out as loudly as any of them, "My horse and bridle and saddle! My horse and bridle and saddle!" But before the word was well out of his mouth, another man cried out, "Arrah, Guleesh, me boy, are you here with us again? How are you getting on with your woman? There's no use in you calling for your horse tonight. I'll go bail you won't play such a trick on us again. It was a good trick you played on us last year." "It was," said another man. "He won't do it again." "Isn't he a prime lad, the same lad, to take a woman with him that never said as much to him as 'How do you do?' since this time last year?" says the third man. "Perhaps he likes to be looking at her," said another voice. "And if the Omadhaun only knew that there's an herb growing up by his own door, and if he were to boil it and give it to her, she'd be well," said another voice. "That's true for you. He is an Omadhaun. Don't bother your head with him. We'll be going. We'll leave the Bodach as he is." And with that they rose up into the air, and out with them, with one rulya-bulya the way they came, and they left poor Guleesh standing where they found him, and the two eyes going out of his head, looking after them and wondering. He did not stand long till he returned back, and he thinking in his own mind on all he saw and heard, and wondering whether there was really an herb at his own door that would bring back the talk to the king's daughter. "It can't be," said he to himself, "that they would tell it to me if there was any virtue in it. But perhaps the she-ho didn't observe himself when he let the words slip out of his mouth. I'll search well as soon as the sun rises whether there's any plant growing beside the house except thistles and darkings." He went home, and as tired as he was, he did not sleep a wink until the sun rose on the morrow. He got up then, and it was the first thing he did to go out and search well through the grass round about the house, trying could he get any herb that he did not recognize. And indeed he was not long searching till he observed a large, strange herb that was growing up just by the gable of the house. He went over to it and observed it closely, and saw that there were 7 little branches coming out of the stalk, and 7 leaves growing on every branch e'en of them, and that there was a white sap in the leaves. "It's very wonderful," said he to himself, "that I never noticed this herb before. If there's any virtue in an herb at all, it ought to be in such a strange one as this." He drew out his knife, cut the plant, and carried it into his own house, stripped the leaves off it, and cut up the stalk, and there came a thick white juice out of it, as there comes out of the sow thistle when it is bruised, except that the juice was more like oil. He put it in a little pot and a little water in it, and laid it on the fire until the water was boiling, and then he took a cup, filled it half up with the juice, and put it to his own mouth. It came into his head then that perhaps it was poison that was in it, and that the good people were only tempting him that he might kill himself with that trick, or put the girl to death without meaning it. He put down the cup again, raised a couple of drops on the top of his finger, and put it to his mouth. It was not bitter, and indeed had a sweet, agreeable taste. He grew bolder then, and drank the full of a thimble of it, and then as much again, and he never stopped till he had half the cup drunk. He fell asleep after that, and did not wake till it was night, and there was great hunger and great thirst on him. He had to wait then till the day rose, but he determined, as soon as he should wake in the morning, that he would go to the king's daughter and give her a drink of the juice of the herb. As soon as he got up in the morning, he went over to the priest's house with the drink in his hand, and he never felt himself so bold and valiant and spirited and light as he was that day, and he was quite certain that it was the drink he drank which made him so hearty. When he came to the house, he found the priest and the young lady within, and they were wondering greatly why he had not visited them for 2 days. He told them all his news, and said that he was certain that there was great power in that herb, and that it would do the lady no hurt, for he tried it himself and got good from it, and then he made her taste it, for he vowed and swore that there was no harm in it. Guleesh handed her the cup, and she drank half of it, and then fell back on her bed, and a heavy sleep came on her, and she never woke out of that sleep till the day on the morrow. Guleesh and the priest sat up the entire night with her, waiting till she should awake, and they, between hope and unhope, between expectation of saving her and fear of hurting her. She awoke at last when the sun had gone half its way through the heavens. She rubbed her eyes and looked like a person who did not know where she was. She was like one astonished when she saw Guleesh and the priest in the same room with her, and she sat up, doing her best to collect her thoughts. The 2 men were in great anxiety, waiting to see would she speak or would she not speak, and when they remained silent for a couple of minutes, the priest said to her, "Did you sleep well, Mary?" And she answered him, "I slept, thank you." No sooner did Guleesh hear her talking than he put a shout of joy out of him, and ran over to her and fell on his 2 knees and said, "A 1,000 thanks to God, who has given you back that talk. Lady of my heart, speak again to me." The lady answered him that she understood. It was he who boiled that drink for her and gave it to her, that she was obliged to him from her heart for all the kindness he showed her since the day she first came to Ireland, and that he might be certain that she never would forget it. Guleesh was ready to die with satisfaction and delight. Then they brought her food, and she ate with a good appetite, and was merry and joyous, and never left off talking with the priest while she was eating. After that, Guleesh went home to his house, and stretched himself on the bed, and fell asleep again, for the force of the herb was not all spent, and he passed another day and a night sleeping. And when he woke up, he went back to the priest's house, and found that the young lady was in the same state, and that she was asleep almost since the time that he left the house. He went into her chamber with the priest, and they remained watching beside her till she awoke the second time, and she had her talk as well as ever, and Guleesh was greatly rejoiced. The priest put food on the table again, and they ate together. And Guleesh used after that to come to the house from day to day, and the friendship that was between him and the king's daughter increased, because she had no one to speak to except Guleesh and the priest, and she liked Guleesh best. So they married one another, and that was the fine wedding they had. And if I were to be there then, I would not be here now. But I heard it from a birdeen that there was neither cark nor care, sickness nor sorrow, mishap nor misfortune on them till the hour of their death. And may the same be with me and with us all. The story of Guleesh.